The Bright Angel Trail wound down into the Grand Canyon like a serpent carved into ancient stone, and Jessica Torres had never seen anything more beautiful in her 32 years. Beside her, her husband Marcus adjusted his camera lens, trying to capture the impossible vastness before them. Their daughter, 9-year-old Emma, bounced impatiently between them, her purple backpack decorated with butterfly stickers catching the morning sun. "Can we go now?" Emma pleaded, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Marcus laughed, his deep voice echoing slightly off the canyon walls. "Patience, Mija. We've got all day." It was April 17th, 2008, and the Torres family from Phoenix had driven 3 hours north for a spring break adventure they'd been planning for months. Marcus, an emergency room nurse, had finally gotten 3 consecutive days off, and Jessica, who taught 5th grade at Desert Vista Elementary, was eager to show Emma the natural wonders they'd only read about in books. Before we continue with this gripping story, if you're enjoying it so far, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps us keep bringing you these incredible true stories. Now let's get back to the Torres family's journey into the canyon. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of juniper and pine. They'd started early, arriving at the South Rim trailhead by 7 a.m. to beat the crowds and the heat. The ranger at the visitor center, a weathered man named Chuck Patterson, who'd worked at the canyon for 23 years, had given them the standard warnings: carry plenty of water, don't hike during the hottest hours, turn back if anyone feels dizzy or nauseous. "Most rescues happen because people overestimate their abilities," Patterson had said, his pale blue eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "The canyon looks inviting from up here, but it'll humble you real quick." Jessica had nodded, mentally checking off their supplies. 4 liters of water, sandwiches, first aid kit, Emma's inhaler, though she rarely needed it anymore, sunscreen, hats, and Marcus's emergency whistle he carried from his work gear. They were prepared, or so they thought. The descent was easier than expected. Emma chattered constantly, pointing out lizards sunning themselves on rocks and asking questions about every geological formation. Marcus explained how the Colorado River had carved the canyon over millions of years, his voice animated with the same enthusiasm he brought to teaching Emma about the human body or the stars. They passed other hikers on their way up, red-faced and sweating despite the cool morning. A German couple warned them in accented English that it was much harder going back up. An elderly woman with hiking poles advised them to turn around at Indian Garden, the rest house 4.5 miles down. But the Torres family had studied the maps. They'd planned to hike down to the Bright Angel campground, rest for a few hours, then make the return journey the next day after camping overnight. Jessica had made reservations 6 months in advance. At Indian Garden, they stopped for lunch beneath the cottonwood trees, the only green oasis visible for miles. Emma made friends with another family from Seattle, their teenage sons teaching her to skip stones in Garden Creek. The water gurgled and splashed, a soothing counterpoint to the canyon's vast silence. "How you feeling?" Marcus asked Jessica, handing her a granola bar. "Good. Great, actually." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "This is exactly what we needed, away from hospitals and parent-teacher conferences and just everything." They continued their descent around 2 p.m., despite the rising temperature. The canyon walls towered above them, bands of red, orange, and cream-colored rock that Jessica tried to photograph but couldn't quite capture. The scale was too immense, too overwhelming for a camera lens. That's when Emma noticed it first. "Mum, what's that?" She pointed to the eastern wall, where the afternoon sun cast deep shadows into countless crevices and caves. Jessica squinted, following Emma's finger. About 50 yards off the main trail, partially hidden by a rockfall that looked relatively recent, there was an opening in the canyon wall. It was larger than most of the small caves and alcoves they'd passed, and something about it seemed different. The darkness inside looked deeper, more complete. "Probably just another cave," Marcus said, checking his watch. "We should keep moving if we want to reach the campground before dark." But Emma was already scrambling off the trail, her curiosity overriding her usual caution. "It looks huge, Dad, like really huge." "Emma, wait!" Jessica called, but her daughter was quick, nimble as a mountain goat on the rocky terrain. Marcus sighed and followed, Jessica close behind. As they approached the opening, they realized Emma was right. This wasn't just another shallow alcove worn by wind and water. The entrance was at least 10 feet high and twice as wide, and when Marcus shone his flashlight inside, the beam seemed to be swallowed by an immense darkness. "Whoa!" Emma breathed. The air coming from the cave was noticeably cooler, almost cold, and carried a mineral scent mixed with something else, something ancient and undisturbed. Marcus stepped closer to the entrance, his flashlight beam revealing smooth walls that didn't look entirely natural. There were marks, subtle but deliberate, as if tools had shaped the stone. "We shouldn't go in," Jessica said, though she found herself moving forward anyway, drawn by the same inexplicable pull she saw in her husband's and daughter's faces. "Just a few feet," Marcus promised. "Just to see." They entered together, Emma between her parents, all three holding hands. The temperature dropped immediately, and their footsteps echoed in a way that suggested vast space beyond what their eyes could see. Marcus's flashlight revealed a tunnel, not a cave, sloping gently downward and curving out of sight. On the walls were markings, definitely not natural, symbols that looked vaguely like petroglyphs, but different somehow, more geometric, more intentional. Jessica, who'd taught a unit on Native American history, didn't recognize the style. "This is incredible," Marcus whispered. "Why isn't this on any of the maps? Why isn't there a ranger station or signs?" Maybe it's protected," Jessica suggested. "Or maybe they don't know about it. That rockfall at the entrance looked recent." They continued deeper, their initial plan to only go a few feet abandoned in the face of discovery. The tunnel widened into a chamber, and when Marcus swept his flashlight around, all three of them gasped. The walls were covered in paintings, preserved by the dry air and protected from the elements. Figures, animals, celestial bodies, and strange geometric patterns filled every surface in rich reds, yellows, and blacks. Emma pointed to the far side of the chamber, where another tunnel branched off into deeper darkness. "Can we see where it goes?" "No," Jessica said firmly, though her own curiosity raged. "We need to mark this location, get back to the trail, and report it to the rangers. This could be an important archaeological site." Marcus nodded, though reluctance showed in his face. He pulled out his GPS unit, one of the early handheld models that had become popular with hikers, and marked the coordinates. Then he took several photographs with his digital camera, the flash briefly illuminating the ancient paintings in harsh white light. They were backing toward the entrance, still marveling at their discovery when they heard it. A sound like grinding stone, deep and resonant, coming from somewhere in the tunnel system. It vibrated through the rock beneath their feet. "Earthquake?" Marcus asked, pulling Emma close. But it wasn't an earthquake. The sound was too regular, too rhythmic, almost mechanical, though that made no sense this deep in the canyon, this far from any modern development. "We need to leave," Jessica said, her teacher's instinct for danger suddenly screaming. "Now!" They hurried back toward the entrance, but something was wrong. The light from outside, which had been a bright rectangle guiding them out, seemed dimmer now. And the grinding sound was getting louder, closer, accompanied by a vibration they could feel in their bones. When they reached the entrance, they understood why the light had dimmed. The rockfall that had partially concealed the cave entrance was moving, expanding, rocks tumbling and sliding as if the entire cliff face had become unstable. Dust filled the air, making them cough, and the opening was shrinking before their eyes. "Run!" Marcus shouted, pushing Emma and Jessica forward. They sprinted the last 20 feet, Marcus in the rear, just as a boulder the size of a refrigerator crashed down, missing him by inches. They tumbled out into the canyon air, rolling away from the entrance as more rocks fell, the grinding sound reaching a crescendo. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by their ragged breathing and Emma's quiet sobs of fear. When the dust cleared, they turned to look at the cave entrance. It was gone, completely sealed by thousands of tons of rock, as if it had never existed at all. Marcus stood slowly, his hands trembling as he brushed dust from his clothes. What the hell just happened? Jessica had no answer. She held Emma tight, checking her daughter for injuries, finding only scrapes and bruises. They were lucky. They should have been crushed. The timing of their exit had been impossibly perfect, as if they'd been allowed to leave just in time. "Did you get the coordinates?" Jessica asked Marcus. He pulled out his GPS unit, but the screen was cracked, probably from their tumble out of the cave. When he tried to turn it on, nothing happened. His camera, however, was intact, and he checked the display screen to confirm the photographs were still there. The images of the painted chamber, proof of what they'd found. They made their way back to the main trail in shocked silence, Emma clinging to Jessica's hand. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the canyon, and they realized they'd been inside the cave much longer than they'd thought. Nearly 2 hours, though it had felt like minutes. At Indian Garden, they found a ranger station and reported what had happened. The ranger on duty, a young woman named Kelly Rodriguez, listened with increasing skepticism. "There are no unmapped caves in that area," she said carefully. "The canyon has been extensively surveyed. Every significant geological feature is documented." "We were inside it," Marcus insisted. "We have photographs." He showed her the camera display, but Rodriguez's expression only grew more concerned. "Mr. Torres, I don't know what you think you saw, but these photographs show rock formations, canyon walls, nothing unusual." Marcus stared at the screen, his face going pale. She was right. Where there should have been images of the painted chamber, there were only pictures of ordinary canyon rock. The symbols, the paintings, the tunnel, all of it gone, replaced by unremarkable geology. "That's not possible," Jessica said. "We all saw it. We were inside." Rodriguez's expression softened with sympathy. "The canyon can play tricks on people, especially if you're dehydrated or experiencing heat exhaustion. The mind fills in gaps, creates false memories. It's more common than you'd think." "We're not dehydrated," Marcus said firmly, "and we're not crazy." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. How could the photographs be wrong? How could the GPS coordinates be lost? And that rockfall, the timing of it, the mechanical grinding sound, none of it made sense. Rodriguez insisted they see the medical staff at the South Rim, concerned about possible heat stroke or altitude sickness. The exam revealed nothing wrong, but the park psychologist, Dr. Raymond Klein, spoke with them for over an hour. "Shared false memories are a documented phenomenon," Klein explained gently, "especially in family units with strong emotional bonds. One person suggests an interpretation of ambiguous stimuli, and the others unconsciously adopt and embellish that interpretation." "My daughter is 9 years old," Jessica said coldly. "She doesn't know anything about false memories or psychological phenomena. She knows what she saw." Emma, exhausted and frightened, had fallen asleep in Jessica's lap, her face still smudged with dust from the cave. From the cave that apparently didn't exist. They spent that night in a motel in Tusayan, the small town just outside the park gates. None of them slept well. Jessica kept seeing those symbols on the cave walls, trying to remember their exact shapes. Marcus obsessively checked and rechecked his camera and GPS unit, as if the data might somehow reappear. Emma woke twice from nightmares she couldn't or wouldn't describe. In the morning, they decided to try finding the cave again. Despite Rodriguez's dismissal, despite Dr. Klein's gentle skepticism, they needed proof. They needed to know they weren't losing their minds. But when they returned to the area, guided by Marcus's memory of the location, they found nothing. The cliff face was unbroken, ancient, undisturbed. No recent rockfall, no concealed entrance, no sign that anything had changed in thousands of years. Other hikers passed by, glancing curiously at the Torres family standing and staring at blank rock. "It was here," Emma said quietly. "I know it was here." Jessica knelt beside her daughter, looking into Emma's brown eyes. "I know, sweetheart. I know." They hiked out of the canyon that afternoon, their original plans abandoned. The drive back to Phoenix was silent, each member of the family lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived home, it felt as if they'd been gone much longer than 3 days, as if they'd crossed some invisible threshold and returned changed. Marcus tried to research what they'd seen, spending hours online looking for information about undiscovered caves in the Grand Canyon, about ancient paintings and symbols, about unexplained rockfalls. He found nothing relevant, though he discovered the canyon had a long history of mysterious disappearances, people who vanished without a trace, their bodies never recovered despite extensive searches. Jessica noticed Marcus had stopped talking about the cave at work, stopped mentioning it to friends. The few times he had, in those first days after returning, the reactions had been the same: polite concern, suggestions that they'd been confused or disoriented, gentle implications that they'd imagined it all. By summer, they rarely discussed it even with each other. It had become a family secret, a shared experience they couldn't explain and that no one else believed. Emma stopped mentioning it at school after her best friend told her mom, and her mom had called Jessica with worried questions about whether Emma needed counseling. Life returned to normal, or a semblance of normal. Marcus continued his nursing shifts. Jessica taught her classes. Emma grew and changed as children do. But sometimes, late at night, Jessica would wake to find Marcus at his computer, still searching, still trying to understand. And sometimes Emma would draw pictures instead of doing her homework, geometric patterns and symbols she claimed she couldn't remember, but her hands seemed to know anyway. Years passed. Emma started high school, then college. Marcus's hair grayed at the temples. Jessica took a position as vice principal. The Grand Canyon trip became family history, something that happened a long time ago. Strange and unexplainable, but distant. They never went back to the canyon. By unspoken agreement, they avoided it, took vacations to the coast instead, to mountains that weren't carved with ancient mysteries. But the cave never truly left them. It lived in the silence between certain conversations, in the way Marcus sometimes paused when watching documentaries about archaeology, in the distant look that would sometimes come over Emma's face when she stared at rock formations or stone buildings. They had touched something that day, or it had touched them, and the mark remained even if they couldn't see or explain it. In 2023, 15 years after their experience, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a Dr. Sarah Blackwood, a geologist with the United States Geological Survey, who specialized in cave systems and underground formations. "Mr. Torres." Her voice was professional, but tinged with excitement. "I hope this isn't too strange, but I've been reviewing satellite imagery of the Grand Canyon as part of a comprehensive geological survey, and I've found something unusual, something that matches a report you filed with park rangers in April 2008. Marcus's heart began to race. "What did you find?" "There's a thermal anomaly in the canyon wall, exactly where you described finding a cave entrance. Our new satellite technology can detect temperature differentials through rock, and there's definitely a large void space behind that cliff face. A very large void space with passages that extend deep into the earth. Mr. Torres, I think you were right. I think you found something that's been hidden for a very long time. Doctor. Blackwood arrived in Phoenix 3 days later with a team of specialists, geologists, archaeologists, and a structural engineer named David Park, who specialized in ancient construction. They met at the Torres home, now empty with Emma away at university, and Marcus and Jessica told their story again, in full detail, for the first time in 15 years. The team listened without interruption, taking notes, asking occasional clarifying questions. When Marcus finished, Dr. Blackwood opened her laptop and displayed the satellite imagery. These are thermal scans taken from a new generation of satellites, she explained. The technology can penetrate rock and detect cavities based on temperature differentials and echo patterns. And this is what we found at the coordinates you remembered. The image showed the canyon in false color, reds and oranges indicating temperature variations. And there, exactly where Marcus had described, was a blue-black area that branched and spread like the root system of an enormous tree. Tunnels and chambers extending hundreds of feet into the earth, a complex that dwarfed any known cave system in the canyon. How is it possible no one found this before? Jessica asked, staring at the screen. The entrance was sealed, Dr. Blackwood said. We brought ground-penetrating radar to the site last week. There's been a massive rockfall, but it didn't happen naturally. The stone was placed deliberately, like a door being closed. Someone or something sealed that entrance, Mr. Torres, and based on the way you described that grinding sound, I think it happened while you were inside. You believe us, Marcus said quietly. I believe the evidence, and I believe you stumbled onto something that someone wanted to stay hidden. The question is why. The archaeologist, Dr. James Chen, leaned forward. The symbols you described, Mr. Torres, the geometric patterns, they don't match any known Native American petroglyphs in the region, but they do match something else. There have been other reports over the years, always dismissed or explained away, of similar markings found in deep caves throughout the Southwest, always in places that are later sealed or become inaccessible. There's a theory, completely unproven and rejected by mainstream archaeology, that there was a civilization here long before the ancestors of modern native tribes, something ancient and sophisticated that left almost no trace. That's impossible, Jessica said. We would have found evidence, artifacts, remains, something. Chen smiled slightly. Unless they didn't want to be found. Unless they went underground, literally, and took their civilization with them. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Blackwood's team prepared an expedition to reopen the cave entrance. It required special permission from the National Park Service, congressional approval due to the potential archaeological significance, and careful planning to ensure safety. The rockfall that had sealed the entrance was massive and unstable. Moving it without causing further collapses would be delicate work. Marcus and Jessica were invited to join the expedition, an unusual allowance given they weren't professionals. But Dr. Blackwood argued their first-hand experience was invaluable. Emma flew home from Berkeley, unwilling to miss the validation they'd waited 15 years to receive. On a cool morning in October 2023, they stood at the base of the canyon wall with a team of 20 specialists, watching as engineers carefully removed rock using precision equipment and laser-guided cutting tools. The work took 3 days, each stone catalogued and examined before removal, each layer revealing more of the artificial construction beneath. When they finally broke through, the opening was exactly as the Torres family remembered. 10 feet high, twice as wide, with that same profound darkness beyond, and the cold air that smelled of minerals and time. Dr. Blackwood entered first with a full geological survey team, their equipment far more sophisticated than Marcus's handheld flashlight had been 15 years before. The painted chamber was there, exactly as Marcus had photographed it, though his original pictures had shown only blank stone. The symbols covered every surface, and Dr. Chen spent hours examining them, his excitement growing with each passing minute. "This is older than anything we've found in North America," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Thousands of years older, and look at this." He pointed to one wall, where symbols seemed to form a map or diagram. "This shows the tunnel system. It's extensive, going down at least 1,000 feet with dozens of chambers. And here, at the lowest point, there's something large. A structure, maybe, or a central chamber." The team set up base camp in the entrance chamber and began a careful exploration of the tunnel system. Marcus, Jessica, and Emma were allowed to accompany them, though they stayed close to the specialists and followed every safety protocol. The tunnels were indeed extensive, carved with precision that suggested advanced tools or knowledge. The walls were smooth, the angles precise, and every 50 feet or so there were chambers with more paintings, more symbols, more evidence of a sophisticated culture that had existed in absolute secrecy. On the third day of exploration, they reached the lowest level, following the map from the entrance chamber. The tunnel opened into a space so vast their lights couldn't reach the far walls. Dr. Blackwood's echolocation equipment suggested the chamber was nearly a quarter-mile across, with a ceiling hundreds of feet high, and in the center of that impossible space, they found it. A structure, definitely artificial, rising from the cavern floor like a stepped pyramid, but made of the same rock as the canyon itself, as if it had been carved in place rather than built. The surface was covered in more symbols, more intricate and complex than anything they'd seen above, and at the apex was an opening, a doorway leading inside. "Should we go in?" David Park asked, his engineering expertise clearly struggling with what his eyes were seeing. Dr. Blackwood hesitated, then nodded. "That's why we're here." They climbed the structure using handholds that seemed designed for that purpose, though worn by unimaginable age. Inside the doorway was a chamber, circular, with a domed ceiling that was covered in what looked like a star map, though none of the constellations were familiar. And in the center of the chamber was a stone platform with more symbols, these ones seeming to pulse and flow in the beam of their flashlights, though that had to be an optical illusion, a trick of light and ancient pigment. Emma stepped forward before anyone could stop her, drawn by the same pull she'd felt 15 years ago. She reached out and touched the symbols on the platform, her fingers tracing patterns that her conscious mind didn't remember, but her body seemed to know. The grinding sound started immediately, that same deep resonance they'd heard before, but this time it didn't come from the tunnel entrance. It came from beneath the platform, from deep in the earth below their feet. The stone began to descend, a spiral staircase revealing itself as the platform rotated and sank, leading down into darkness that seemed to have no bottom. "Emma, step back," Jessica said firmly, pulling her daughter away from the platform, but the mechanism had been triggered. The staircase continued its descent, and a light began to glow from below, not electric or fire, but something else, bioluminescent maybe, or some unknown technology that defied simple explanation. And with that light came sounds, faint but distinct, like machinery humming, like life continuing in places that should have been dead and dark for millennia. Dr. Blackwood made the decision that would later be debated in academic and government circles for years. We're going down. The descent took hours, the spiral staircase seeming to go on forever, cut through solid rock with the same impossible precision as everything else. The light grew brighter as they descended, and the humming sounds resolved into distinct patterns, rhythmic and purposeful. At the bottom, They found a city. Not ruins, not artifacts, but a city, intact and functioning, carved into a cavern system that shouldn't exist beneath the Grand Canyon. Buildings rose from the cavern floor, connected by bridges and walkways, all carved from the same stone, but shaped with such artistry that they seemed almost organic, as if they'd grown rather than been built. And there were lights, that same bioluminescent glow emanating from crystals embedded in the walls and ceilings, providing illumination that revealed the true scale of what lay before them. Miles of structures, evidence of a civilization that had existed completely unknown, completely hidden, beneath one of the most visited natural landmarks in the world. "This is impossible," Dr. Chen whispered. "This is absolutely impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was real, and they were standing in it, and every member of the expedition team knew their lives had just been divided into before and after this moment. They explored for hours, documenting everything, taking samples, mapping the layout. The city appeared abandoned, but not recently. The dust on the ground was undisturbed, the air stale but breathable, as if the ventilation system, whatever it was, still functioned after countless years. There were no bodies, no obvious signs of what had happened to the inhabitants, just the empty structures and the humming machinery that maintained the lights and air. In what appeared to be a central building, larger and more ornate than the others, they found a chamber with walls covered in a narrative sequence of paintings and symbols. Dr. Chen spent hours studying them, his team assisting with translation equipment and comparative linguistic software. "It's a history," he finally said, his voice hushed with awe. "The story of their people. They came from somewhere else, not another continent, but I think they're saying from above, from the sky. They established themselves here, underground, avoiding contact with the peoples on the surface. They developed their civilization in secret, in harmony with the earth, and they thrived for thousands of years." "What happened to them?" Marcus asked. Chen continued studying the paintings. "They left, or some of them did. There was a decision, a choice to depart, to return to, it's not clear, but they sealed their city, locked it away, left it as a time capsule or a memorial. And they set guardians, mechanisms that would protect it from discovery. That's what you triggered 15 years ago, Mr. Torres. The city's defense system designed to seal the entrance if anyone found it. But it let you leave. It didn't trap you. Almost as if it was programmed to avoid casualties, to simply hide itself again." Emma was standing near another wall, one covered in symbols that seemed different from the historical narrative. "What about these?" "Doctor." Chen joined her, studying the markings. His expression changed from curiosity to confusion to something approaching fear. "These are warnings, I think. Or prophecies. They talk about a time when the world above would be in danger, when the hidden ones would need to return, when the doors would open again. They talk about signs, celestial events, environmental changes." He turned to face the group. "They talk about now, about our time. As if they knew we would find this, as if they wanted us to find it." Dr. Blackwood's satellite phone rang, the signal somehow penetrating even this deep underground, a mystery that the engineers couldn't explain. The conversation was brief, and when she hung up, her face was pale. "That was the USGS Central Office. There's been a seismic event, or something like it, registering throughout the entire Southwest. Not an earthquake, but a resonance pattern, like what we heard when Emma activated that platform. It's coming from multiple sites, all places that have legends of underground cities or sealed caves. They're all activating simultaneously." The humming around them changed pitch, growing louder, more insistent. The lights brightened, and in the distance they heard sounds that hadn't been there before. Footsteps, maybe, or machinery coming online after ages of dormancy. Something was waking up. "We need to leave," David Park said urgently. Now, this entire structure could be unstable. But as they turned to retreat back up the spiral staircase, they found their path blocked. Not by a collapse or a malfunction, but by figures, humanoid but not quite human, emerging from doorways and passages they hadn't seen before. Tall and slender, with features that were elegant but alien, wearing clothing that seemed to be made of the same stone as the city, but moved like fabric. The beings made no hostile moves, but their presence was overwhelming. One stepped forward, taller than the others, and spoke in a language that sounded like stones grinding and water flowing, completely incomprehensible, yet somehow, impossibly, the team understood. "You have opened the door at the appointed time," the being said, or seemed to say, the words forming in their minds rather than their ears. "The watchers above sent the signal. The world you know is changing, approaching a threshold. We return now, not to rule or conquer, but to help, to share what we learned in our long exile, to prevent the catastrophes that drove us underground so long ago." Marcus found his voice, though it shook. "Who are you?" "We are the Anavasi, the people from before. Your ancestors knew us once, before the forgetting, before the separation. We went below to escape the disasters that reshaped the surface world. We preserved our knowledge, our technology, our understanding of the Earth's cycles, and we waited for the signs that would tell us it was time to return." Dr. Blackwood stepped forward, her scientific mind grappling with impossibility. "Why now? Why reveal yourselves after so many thousands of years?" "Because the cycle is repeating. The signs are clear to those who know how to read them. The climate shifts, the extinction events, the instability of the Earth's crust. It happened before, and it will happen again unless the surface peoples learn what we learned. We can help, but only if you accept that help. Only if you can believe what seems impossible." Emma, showing a courage that Marcus and Jessica recognized from that day 15 years ago, spoke up. "We believe. We've seen what's impossible, and we know it's real." The being, the Anavasi elder, turned its ancient gaze to Emma. "You activated the awakening, young one. Your genetic pattern carries markers from our people, distant echoes of a time when surface and underground peoples were one. That is why the city let you leave all those years ago. It recognized you, recognized the potential for reconnection. The expedition team spent 3 more days in the underground city, learning, documenting, trying to understand. The Anavasi shared knowledge of sustainable technologies, of understanding geological cycles, of living in balance with the Earth's systems. They showed monitoring equipment that had been recording the surface world's environmental data for millennia, predictions and models that aligned with the most alarming climate science of the 21st century. When the team finally emerged from the cave, they found the world waiting. The resonance event had been recorded globally, traced to the Grand Canyon and 6 other sites around the world. Governments were demanding answers, scientists were forming task forces, and the public was hungry for information about what had been discovered. The Torres family became central figures in what would later be called the reconciliation, the process of integrating the knowledge and presence of the Anavasi into surface civilization. It wasn't easy. There were those who denied the evidence, who called it an elaborate hoax despite overwhelming proof. There were others who feared the Anavasi, saw them as invaders or demons, but there were also many who recognized the opportunity, who understood that this impossible discovery might be exactly what humanity needed to address its mounting environmental crises. Marcus retired from nursing to work with the Anavasi healers, learning medical techniques that blended ancient wisdom with advanced understanding of human biology. Jessica developed educational programs that incorporated the Anavasi historical perspective, teaching children about the long cycles of planetary change and the importance of sustainable living. Emma, whose genetic connection to the underground people had been confirmed by testing, became a liaison between the two civilizations, her unique heritage allowing her to bridge cultures that had been separated for thousands of years. The cave entrance at the Grand Canyon remained open, becoming a controlled access point for cultural exchange and learning. Dr. Blackwood's team established a permanent research station, studying the city and documenting its wonders. Dr. Chen published papers that rewrote human history, expanding the timeline of sophisticated civilization in North America by thousands of years. 5 years after the discovery, on the 20th anniversary of that first strange day when the Torres family found something that shouldn't exist, they returned to the cave entrance together. Emma, now working on her doctorate in anthropological archaeology, had brought her research team. Marcus and Jessica, their hair grayer but their spirits renewed by the meaningful work they'd found, walked the trail that had changed their lives 2 decades before. They stood at the cave entrance, no longer sealed, now equipped with lighting and safety equipment and a steady flow of researchers and students. The grinding sound they'd heard all those years ago had been explained, a sophisticated mechanism that monitored the entrance and sealed it when necessary, protecting the city below. But it no longer needed to hide. The secret was out, and the world, slowly, was learning to accept it. "Do you ever think about that day?" Emma asked her parents, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in bands of red and gold. "Every day," Jessica said softly. "We were so scared, so confused. We thought we were losing our minds." Marcus smiled, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "We found something impossible and had to wait 15 years for the world to catch up. But we never stopped believing, did we? We knew what we'd seen was real, even when everyone told us it couldn't be." An Anavasi emerged from the cave entrance, one of the cultural liaisons who'd been helping Marcus with his medical research. It raised a hand in greeting, a gesture it had learned from humans, and Marcus returned it. "Sometimes," he said, "the impossible is just the truth waiting to be discovered. Sometimes the mysteries we encounter aren't meant to destroy us, but to expand us, to show us how much more there is to understand." He pulled both Jessica and Emma close. "We were the lucky ones. We got to be the bridge between the world that was and the world that's becoming." As the sun set fully, the bioluminescent lights of the underground city began to glow through the cave entrance, a soft radiance that spoke of knowledge preserved, of civilizations connected, of impossible mysteries that turned out to be the most important truths of all. The Torres family stood together, watching the light from below meet the stars above, and knew their journey that had begun with fear and confusion had led to understanding that would shape humanity's future. The grinding sound they'd heard 20 years ago had been the door opening, not just to a cave or a city, but to a new chapter of human history. And they, a family of 3 from Phoenix who'd gone to the Grand Canyon for a simple vacation, had been the ones to turn the key.